Hi, I'm Lehrer, class of 2025, and this is my presentation on late medieval architecture, redefining Goth. What comes to mind when I say the word Gothic? Does it look more like this? Or like this? How about medieval or Dark Ages? What comes to mind? Try to keep these feelings in your head as I continue. The Middle Ages were, undisputedly, a time of great change for Europe. Wars, pilgrimages, and invasions were not unheard of as the newly divided countries emerged from the quagmire of a fallen Rome. Centuries passed, accumulating new ideas and beliefs, and bringing independence of identity to territories such as England, France, and Spain. Yet entering the 14th century, with education and literacy at an all-time high, there began a call for the classical, united Rome of nearly a millennia previous. Led by Francesco Petrarch, an Italian scholar, the philosophy of this humanism gained popularity, widely among the wealthier classes. But there were other forces of thought at play during this time, such as the debate between belief in a rational God of earthly logic or an irrational God of a nature impossible for a mere mortal to comprehend. And there is no better mirror for the differences of opinion of these last medieval centuries than architecture. Men have always altered their surroundings to illustrate their image of an ideal world, and Europe during this time was no exception. The late Middle Ages were dominated by two major styles of architecture, Gothic and Classical. The first was the less novel of the two, as it built off the pre-existing standards of Gothic architecture, only enhancing the upward movement of the columns and adding more ornamental details. The second, as the name implies, was a reference back to the aesthetics of Western antiquity, and was characterized by domes, arches, and alcoves. This particular style of architecture appeared in the Italian states, perhaps as a result of Petrarch's popular humanism and the rise of realist painting and sculpture. Though still having some roots in the original French Gothic, this Italian Gothic style was divorced from the traditional skeletal shapes of those buildings. Gone were the vaulted lines and flying buttresses, until only the columns and arches remained, even those being highly revised. Decorations, too, broke these traditions. For example, rather than relying on solely carvings on the plain grey of a cathedral and stained glass to add color and interest to a building, architects began to make patterns by mixing the types of stone themselves. One very early specimen is the Duomo di Siena, whose interior and exterior alike are made of layered black and white stones. Reliefs and paintings on the facades of cathedrals also made for particularly bright and eye-catching displays. There are many beautiful buildings of this style, each with its own unique flair, yet some notable mentions include the Cattedrale di Santa Maria del Fiore of Florence and the Basilica di Sant'Andrea of Mantua, both of which demonstrate the stylized proportions and symmetry of the design. But as impressive as the works themselves are their architects, to whom credit is in full part due. One particularly influential creator of this time was Giovanni Pisano. He began his work at a young age. He was only 15 or so when he was made an assistant to his father in the building of the aforementioned Duomo di Siena. But, in his later career, Pisano was famous for his intricately carved pulpits, which, though not necessarily buildings, beautifully demonstrate the blending of French and Roman architecture that was so sought after during this time. However, one must not forget entirely the merits of the Gothic style. Moving now away from the Mediterranean, we can observe some major changes to European Gothic architecture, if not as pronouncedly as in Italy. Here, the method to the madness was religiously based. Architects wanted their buildings to embody the sense of upward aspiration that came with prayer, and so the previously balanced Gothic structure was abandoned for longer, lither columns and high vaulted ceilings. The roofs of the structures, too, began to taper even thinner than before, matching the interior's aesthetic to the exterior's silhouette. There was also an increase in ornamental work and embellishments, particularly in the interior ceilings, as the walls were comprised of progressively larger and more lavish windows. Some excellent examples of the late medieval Gothic style include the nave of Notre-Dame de Paris, St. Vitus Cathedral in Prague, and, surprising considering its location, the Duomo di Milano in Italy. These cathedrals perfectly illustrate the main elements of this style, from the needle-like spires to the exquisite stained glass details. Yet as different as they may seem, these two European styles have many shared characteristics. Firstly, their geometry. All of the buildings we've looked at have utilized a carefully calculated base, whether it be the straight lines of Notre Dame or the symmetrical facade of Santa Maria del Fiore. The craftsmanship, too, is similar, not necessarily in the designs of the structures, but the attention to detail in their creation. To conclude, I have merely a reminder. Think before you use the word medieval or Gothic to denote something crude, barbaric, and dark. These masterworks of architecture are all a product of the so-called Dark Ages, and they, as I hope you've seen, are not so lacking in beauty as the unopened mind might deem them. Thank you for listening to my TED Talk.